Next, I'm going to introduce our speaker, who is Sergeant Mark Thompson with the Highway Patrol. He's here to talk about distracted driving awareness. It is April, after all. That's the time where we recognize distracted driving. He's going to give you guys some tips, some numbers, and pretty much everything that you guys are going to need in order to stay safe on this April month and just get home to your families. And so now I turn the time over to Mark.
Morning. Thank you, Michael. Boy, I was really surprised when I heard that after putting my headshot up onto the website, people actually still signed up. I don't know that I've ever wanted to do a headshot now that I've seen it. We took lots of them. This was the only one my wife would approve, but hopefully that's the last time. I am Mark Thompson. I am a sergeant with the Utah Highway Patrol. I've been with the Highway Patrol for just over 15 years. I started in Utah County just as a road trooper. I've also worked in Salt Lake County. I worked with the Highway Safety Office, which I actually got to work with the Safety Council years ago. I've also worked in our training division with our commercial motor vehicle enforcement division, and now with our public information and education program, which is a great opportunity for me to be able to reach out across the state and work with businesses, schools, and communities on traffic safety oriented programs. Prior to law enforcement, I was actually in construction. I was an electrician and then a construction manager. So both of those careers have really been oriented towards safety, safety for employees, safety for the public, safety for anyone involved in things. So it's good to be here today to talk a little bit about something that is very important when we talk about safety. Distractions. Distractions can be a hazard in many different environments, anywhere from a construction site to operating equipment or to driving. So today I want to talk a little bit about specifically about distracted driving, what it looks like, some of the things that are distractions we may not recognize, some of the laws that apply to distracted driving, and then maybe some tips and suggestions on things that we can do to avoid those distractions. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA as we usually know them, defines a distraction as any activity that diverts attention from driving, including talking or texting on your phone, eating and drinking, talking to people in your vehicle, fiddling with the stereo, entertainment, or navigation systems. Anything that takes your attention away from the safe task of driving. And I think that's the key to our distractions, and recognizing what they are is often we don't fully acknowledge some of the things that actually are distractions and can influence our driving behaviors. I want to talk about three categories of distractions. The first one's visual, second one will be manual, and the third one is cognitive. And I'll kind of go into a little bit of information about each one of those. The first one is visual. That's maybe one that's most commonly recognized, and it includes things like looking at your phone, GPS, billboards, street signs, passengers, and anything else like that. Visual distractions are a problem because they remove, obscure, or distort a driver's ability to see the roadway, hazards, or other conditions that influence safe operation of a vehicle. Manual distractions occur frequently as well, and can also be associated with visual distractions. These can include things like eating or drinking, personal hygiene like shaving or applying makeup, typing an instant message into a wireless communication device, or adjusting the radio or temperature controls in your vehicle. Manual distractions become a problem because they can reduce our ability to maintain control of the vehicle or make sudden necessary driving inputs. The third category, cognitive. Cognitive distractions are sometimes less noticeable, but they are not less frequent. They may not simultaneously create a visual or a manual distraction, but the effect of them can certainly lead to one. These can include things like deep thoughts, talking with passengers or on the phone, listening to audiobooks or podcasts, feelings of anger or road rage, or being emotional from personal experiences. Cognitive distractions are a problem because they can occupy your mental focus or attention and result in delayed recognition, response to, or even observance of changing conditions, hazards, or regulation of our own driving behaviors. Let me give you a couple examples. We're more familiar with the visual and manual, but with the cognitive, couple of examples. One, think about the last time you drove down the road and talked on your phone. Now, in the state of Utah, if you're 18 years or older, by law, you can legally hold the phone to your ear and have a conversation. Think about the last time you did that. And then think back and consider, do I remember in that period of time I was talking on the phone and driving, what traffic looked like, what the roadway was, the changing of any signals, any control signs, any of those other type of things that you would normally observe and integrate into your cognitive brain, things that were happening on there. Generally, we don't. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we drove in an unsafe condition, but it does show that that phone conversation or other activity occupied some of our attention, and so we can't respond as well or as quickly. Let me give you a personal example. One morning I was on my way to do a presentation somewhere, and I was thinking about the presentation. My computer was closed. I didn't have notes up. It was just me thinking. And I stopped at an on-ramp at the metering lights to meter the traffic that goes onto the freeway. I was at the front of the line waiting for the light to go green so that I could pull forward. I sat there for a few moments and then suddenly realized and thought to myself, I don't remember if the light went green already. And I was staring straight at it. I was looking at nothing other than that light. But I realized that I was experiencing a cognitive distraction. I was so engaged in thinking about what I was going to present, some ideas that I was coming up with, that I didn't recognize whether it had or hadn't changed. And I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, people are less reluctant to honk at a marked police car. So I may have very well sat through a light. I didn't notice anyone going and going and going and me sitting, but the point being, I recognized that I hadn't been able to fully acknowledge and process the changing of that light. Now, thankfully, I probably didn't cause any big hazards. Maybe we made it a cycle and one extra person got in there, but you can kind of see the point. And it was a good attention getter for me, recognizing that those things we don't process as often with those cognitive distractions can be just as much of an issue. So we talk about distractions. Certainly there's a concern about how they affect our safety on the roadway. Let's talk a little bit about some numbers. Crash reporting, that's one of the things that I did at the Highway Safety Office. We did a lot with reporting crashes, getting statistics and numbers, and that's what we relay when we talk on a safety structure. A review of motor vehicle crash data in Utah has shown that as many as 5,400 crashes each year are related to distracted driving. Of those distracted related crashes, reports indicate approximately 41% were cell phones, 27% were distractions inside the vehicle, 17% were distractions outside the vehicle, and 10% involved animals or audio. Interesting combination. I'm not sure if they were at the same distraction or two separate in the same category. And then 4% were passengers. Now, we look at those and think, okay, that's maybe somewhat reflective. But then I think if you really think about it, as you're driving down the road, anecdotally, I don't think that those numbers adequately represent what's actually occurring on the roadways. And I think mostly because drivers don't really recognize the influence of some of those distractions. The visual ones, especially those that are prohibited by law, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute, are more recognizable. Not that we don't do them as often, but when we do them, we're a little more cognizant of the fact that I probably shouldn't be looking at my phone or probably shouldn't be doing this on a wireless communication device. But all of those other ones that occur, we're not as conscious about the fact that they can be distractions. And how does that translate to our numbers and the data? Well, let me give you an example. Let's go back to our driver talking on the phone. You're talking on the phone, driving down the road, and traffic comes to an abrupt stop in front of you. You try to stop, end up running into the car in front of you. Now, when that driver reports to the law enforcement officer investigating it, whether they had a distraction in mind, they're going to say no. There was no distraction because they're not consciously recognizing the influence of that. They're going to say they couldn't brake in time. They're going to say there were other factors that caused it that they weren't able to control, but they're not going to recognize that phone as even a potential distraction. Now, that's not probably to hide the fact the fact that they were on the phone. It's just simply something that's been called inattention blindness. That cognitive distraction of that phone conversation likely contributes to that by one of many or possibly several factors. Things like following too close, too fast for conditions, just the delayed perception and reaction to the vehicles that are stopping ahead, or other traffic conditions that are happening. And the officer very likely may not push the issue of a distraction with all of those other things factors in there. So in that case, that crash probably is not going to be, based on my experience, reported as a distraction-related crash, though very possibly and very likely it had some, maybe not entirely, but some contribution to the circumstances that are there. That's why I think we have an issue in two ways. One, actually reporting sufficiently what the scope of distractions are when we talk about crashes, and even just driving in general. We have lots of near misses on the roadway that don't get reported to anyone anywhere, but probably everyone who's driven on the roadway has either observed or been part of some kind of a close call or a near miss, and likely a majority of those had some type of distraction, whether again it was a visual, a manual, or a cognitive distraction, whether it was legal or illegal to do. So when we talk about legal and illegal, let's talk a little bit about what the laws actually are that govern distractions. The first one I want to talk about, maybe less known, is the careless driving law. The careless driving law has two parts to it. It can be either or. So the first part is 2 or more moving violations in a single continuous period of driving, 3 miles or less, or 1 moving violation, not including speeding, while being distracted by 1 or more activities taking place within the vehicle that are not related to the operation of the vehicle, including searching for an item in a vehicle or attending to personal hygiene or grooming. That's what the law says. Let's give an example, a couple examples of that. Let's go back to our driver on the telephone. Prior to that crash, we talked about just a minute ago in our scenario, the driver is on the phone and is observed by a law enforcement officer following too close, as a distance that's not safe and reasonable or less than 2 seconds. That driver could be stopped and could receive a ticket for careless driving because of the combination of a moving violation and an activity that was not driving related. Another example might be something as simple as trying to change the radio or adjust the temperature control or pick up a food item. And because of that reaching movement, the car drifts a little bit and drifts out of their lane, which is probably something people see quite often, failure to stay in that lane. Normally, that failure to stay in the lane would just be a simple moving violation. However, in this case, when that driver is observed doing an activity that's not driving related, now that violation could be a careless driving citation. If convicted of careless driving is actually a Class C misdemeanor and a moving violation. So what does that translate to? Well, there's a fine involved, and there will also be points on a driver's license. The second one that we're maybe more familiar with, or at least when it first came out, was the texting and driving law. We all know you can't text and drive. Over the years, that's become a little more robust. Utah has pushed, or some legislators have pushed, to go hands-free entirely, but we haven't gotten there. But it has become a little more beefy than what it used to be. It's now titled Prohibition on Using a Wireless Communication Device While Operating a Motor Vehicle. The summary of it: a driver cannot use any type of wireless communication device, which includes cell phones, PDAs, laptops, tablets, notebook computers, movie or music players, or anything similar, to manually do things like send or receive an electronic message, dial a phone number, access the internet, record or view video, take or view a photograph, or enter data while operating a motor vehicle, or anything like that. In that law, though, there are a couple of exceptions. You can view GPS, you can operate hands-free, or you can use voice communication. Let me go back really quickly on the view GPS, because that one usually comes up quite often. Can I use my GPS? Now, certainly the law says you can view it, and it specifically says view. Now, As we talked about earlier, it is allowed by law, but that is going to be a visual distraction. Know that if you're going to use your GPS under law, you need to make sure you set it, hit your go button, whatever it is, mount it, put it down, and then drive. If you have to manipulate that, select it, swipe it, change, add a destination while you're driving, you're in violation, even though that exclusion for viewing GPS is in there. It is simply to view. Just keep in mind, if you're viewing GPS, you are not viewing the road for that period of time. So be cautious. That statute for the wireless communication devices is also a Class C misdemeanor, but it and the careless driving law, it becomes a Class B misdemeanor if that activity results in serious bodily injury or that driver has a prior conviction of one of those violations in the past 3 years. And just for baseline knowledge, a DUI, a first-time offense DUI, is also a Class B misdemeanor. So that Class B misdemeanor has a little bit of teeth to it in what it can do. So we've talked a little bit about what kind of distractions we can have, the 3 categories. We talked a little bit about some of the numbers we've seen, but also how we're maybe not capturing them entirely. We also talked about the law. So let's kind of wrap up on the idea of how can we avoid these distractions? Here's a couple of suggestions. 1, take an inventory. Take an inventory of the distractions in your regular activities. When you're driving down the road, what things are you doing that are not driving related? In construction, we always did pre-job safety meeting before any job site, just to identify any recognizable or potential hazards. You can do the same thing in your vehicle. You probably won't have to do it every time once you start to recognize what some of those hazards are in those distractions and remove them. Second one, make a plan. You've got some activities and things that you need to do. Decide how you can do them safely. First, like I talked about with your GPS, set your GPS, have it ready to go, and make sure that it is posted somewhere. If you're going to view it, you can do it safely, or if you can listen to it instead of viewing, maybe better. Music, if you're going to use music, set your playlist, have that going so that you're not having to use that while you're driving. Also, you can ask passengers to perform non-driving related tasks that are necessary. It's really ironic to see how often people are driving down the road and the driver is texting, using a phone, or doing some other activity that's not driving related, and there's a passenger sitting in the seat right next to them doing nothing but staring out the window. If there's an activity that you need to do that doesn't have to do with driving and you have a passenger, maybe that's a good solution. You need to just decide to avoid distractions. Many phone manufacturers have settings that you can set to do not disturb. That's an easy one you can put on there. I'll give you a personal experience. My youngest daughter is 15 and a half and has her driver's permit, and she's starting to drive. The other day I was driving with her. She has an Apple phone or Apple Watch, and I heard her start saying something, and I looked over. She had both hands on the wheel and she's looking out the window, but kind of motioning towards her wrist and saying, "Don't look at your phone, you're driving." And I thought she must have got some notification. It must have vibrated or something, but she was cognizant of that and then out loud said to herself, "Don't look at your phone, you are driving." Maybe we need to get back to doing some of that. Acknowledge that distraction and say, "I'm not going to participate in that distraction. I'm driving." Company policies. Depending on the circumstances and business needs, some distractions are unnecessary while driving and can be restricted while operating company vehicles. Commercial vehicle drivers already are prohibited by law from holding a wireless device and having a voice communication. Maybe that's something, also texting, but that's a little more stringent than what our state law is. Maybe that's something to consider in a business environment, especially when we're doing a lot of driving. Maybe be aware of some of the job duties, things that affect it, like dispatch information, delivery information that's relayed on wireless devices, and how you can prevent using that. I see a lot of delivery drivers, and in the motor vehicle enforcement division, I stopped a lot of commercial vehicle drivers that were on their phones who reported that they were receiving information from their dispatch about updates on locations and things like that. Now, certainly we don't want to do that. So maybe we look at, from a business standpoint, how do we prevent, or how do we better allow that information to be funneled down to drivers so that they're not having to do that while they're in transit, or simply making sure and enforcing a policy that says they do not. Another one, just developing good habits. I talk a lot about habits when we go and talk to our driver education classes, talk about developing good habits. We see a lot of bad habits on the roadway. Problem with habits is it's something we do unconsciously. Our brain creates habits so we can avoid having to think through everything. So developing good habits through repeating good driving behaviors can help reduce the potential influence of those distractions. We talked about especially those cognitive distractions. When drivers have good habits, then less cognitive regulation is required, resulting in more consistent, safe driving, even when common distractions, especially cognitive ones, are present. When you're used to maintaining a safe following distance by habit, a cognitive distraction will likely not restrict that, and you will start following too close. If your speed regulation is proper because of good habits, then even those potential just going to happen cognitive distractions aren't going to change that. It's when we don't have good habits and we're trying to consciously regulate our speed, our following distance, stopping at stoplights and stop signs, that we run into problems because we cannot multitask. Our brain cannot do more than one complex task at a time. It shifts between them. So we'll think about our conversation, then we'll see how fast we're going or how close we're following. So just creating good driving habits. Again, that comes from repeating good driving behaviors until they're habit oriented. The last one I would suggest is just a commitment to change. Implementation intentions have shown in studies to multiply success in attempted behavior change. Just like my daughter verbally telling herself not to look at her phone, implementation intentions are verbal, or even better, written action plans for what you will or won't do. Companies could very easily create a pledge board or a banner or a document or some kind of thing like that, where employees can pledge to do or not do certain behaviors in order to improve safety. That's where we really need to get to. I think ultimately the acknowledgement and the recognition of some of these distractions and the fact that they are distractions and how they can affect our driving behaviors is really kind of step one. The law identifies, we know, the wireless communication devices. I think very few people don't know that or don't understand that law. In fact, we find quite often when I give a scenario where a driver's on the phone that's 18 years old, people say, oh, I didn't know you could be on your phone like that. So I think there's a knowledge of it. On the same side, there's a lot of belief that one time's not going to hurt. One time it's not going to be a problem. I'll grab my hamburger and unwrap it and drive with my knee for just a moment. Which we know is very common, right? Knee driving, I'm surprised it's not taught in driver's education as often as it happens. But I think it's acknowledging the fact that those are actually distractions. We say distraction, we say, oh, that's something bad that's going to affect safe driving. And then we say, oh, those are all distractions. So we're remembering, what are visual distractions that you experience in your vehicle? What are cognitive distractions? And what are manual distractions? And how can we lessen their influence? How can we lessen their frequency to improve our safety? And I think any one of those suggestions, or multiple, or maybe more, that you can come up with in a business environment or individually will be very helpful. Questions? Yes, please.
So obviously, I think we all see plenty of distracted driving here in the States. Is there a point at which we, as the other drivers, should like notify someone of like, hey, this person is driving distractedly and they may cause a problem? Is that even something we should look out for? At what point should we report something?
Yeah, I think you probably apply the same standards if you just believed it was an impaired driver. If you've got a driver that's driving in a manner that's creating a safety issue for other people, then that should be something that's reported. Now, certainly if they're on their phone and you see them, they drift out and back, and maybe they set their phone down, that may have been at least temporarily resolved, but if certainly it's something that's so egregious that it's going to cause, it appears that it's going to cause, it's reasonably going to cause some kind of a hazard to themselves or to anyone else, then I would definitely report that. Yep.
What's the latest with autonomous cars and, law with cars that, drive you home while you're, reading paper or finishing up last thing before? That's still illegal, right? Even if you're in a self-driving car heading home, you still can't. Yeah, like Teslas, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I wish I had better information to share with you. I know when it first came out years ago, in fact, when I was at the Highway Safety Office probably between 2014 and 15, that was a big thing in traffic records, was talking about those autonomous vehicles. The state of Utah has a section in the statute about autonomous vehicles and operation. I know it used to say, and I don't know that it's changed, but it used to say there was someone still needed to be in, I can't remember the correct wordage, but basically in control of that vehicle. There needed to be a driver that was at least enough engaged in seeing what the vehicle was doing, but I don't know the progression of it. It seems like it's kind of ebbed and flowed and, oh, they're good to go. And then there was issues and now we're kind of driving those more. I don't have a Tesla, so I can't tell you what the scope of what they can or can't do. But I know that is kind of gone back and forth, and the legislature has been addressing that with a statute that addresses autonomous driving vehicles specifically. So we might have to do a little more research to get back on you on that one.
Like my boyfriend owns a Tesla, so the time that I drive in Tesla, I hate it because I find myself like looking at the GPS all the time, and it's so distracting to me. Like, because I cannot like really concentrate, so I just drive my own car. But it's so distracting just to be like, this is a big screen, and then it's like and I'm touching everything, and it's so hard to find stuff, and because I'm not used to it, so. Like, I just my Honda. I just tried my Honda. But it's so distracting. I can see it as distraction.
That's a good point. And we didn't really talk about those, but those are also really cover any of those visual, cognitive, and manual distractions that are just controls of the vehicle. Lots and lots of those now, more often, even to the size and scope that even if you're not trying to look at them, things pop up on there and they can pull your attention. Other questions?
Yeah, do you have any good examples of all three types of distractions? Because like Lawrence in my class will talk about the Menace, the Utah County Trumpeter. You're familiar with that story?
Mm-mm.
Basically a dude in traffic playing a trumpet with sheet music in front of him while he's driving. And how that is completely legal as long as he maintains his lane for the most part, because there's no specific laws targeting that kind of behavior. So what kind of examples do you have? Something like that?
Yeah. So not very often are people in that situation capable of maintaining their safe operation of their vehicle, like to stay in your lane and maintain your speed and following distances for very long. That's usually why we end up finding one. I stopped somebody who had a laptop computer on their lap and was reading a book while they were trying to drive. The fact of the matter is, no matter how professional you are and no matter what your good driving habits are, changes in road conditions, traffic conditions, hazards that are on the roadways, you're just not going to be able to respond to those. So whether it be the orchestra player or the individual trying to read their book or whatever it is on their laptop or play games on their computer. I had a commercial vehicle driver trying to take a photo of a mountains he'd never seen. And even in that case, just one hand drifted enough to get out of his lane in a large commercial vehicle. And so that's what we had that same conversation and that citation for it. Certainly that's something to be aware of. Maybe as a follow-up to what do we do with the hazardous driver? Okay, maybe the orchestra player is somehow maintaining their lane at the time. As a defensive driver, if I'm just traveling down the road, I'm going to be very aware. Notice, probably anyone's going to notice that, but be very aware of, I'm not going to have this person following me. I'm not going to follow them. I'm not going to drive next to them. Just I think recognizing that the odds of them being able to react to the things that are going on around them is not going to be good, and removing myself from that. So again, back to the question on what do we do with them? They're putting on makeup, or they're shaving or brushing their teeth or whatever else, or trying to eat. They may be staying in their lane, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be comfortable watching them in my rear view mirror the entire time I drive in congested traffic, coming into Salt Lake, knowing at some point I'm going to be hitting my brakes, and just figuring, oh, they stayed in their lane, they probably will too, right? I want to be avoiding those kind of things from a defensive driving standpoint. So. There questions or comments? Yes.
How many accidents do you think are caused because of distracted driving?
Boy,
The percentage.
well, I would love to be able to say that. I think, again, it's a lot higher. I'm certain it's a lot higher than what we report. The hard part, again, and even admittedly, if we reported all the distractions, we still need to acknowledge that there are most of the time, there are multiple factors. So I may be on the phone and I may have not perceived the response as quickly as I needed to. But there could be, I have tires that are worn, right? Or I have roadways that the friction surface is, off a little bit because of a recent rain or something. So is it just the distraction? Maybe not. Certainly we do have crashes that are just simply a distraction. I'm staring at my phone and then I look up and, I've already plowed into the back of a car, or I went right through the red light and got, T-boned or hit somebody. Certainly there are going to be those. But then it gets kind of graduated in how much did that impact? That's where I say there are things, and certainly if vehicle equipment is outside of the scope of today's discussion, but looking at those, but definitely acknowledging the influence, any influence of a distraction, take that out of the equation. And I think we'll see a significant reduction in crashes, but we'll probably still see some from those other influences that could have contributed in that circumstance too. So I know that you wanted a number. I would love to give you a number. I'd love to say, 100% of them, but it's not. But I don't know if reasonably we'll ever be able to actually quantify it, just because of that. Just because, again, talking on the phone are things that you would never recognize as that distraction. The deep thoughts, the emotions, those things that we're just never, often we're not going to put two and two together, that my driving was different today because of that and as a result. So yes, sir.
Sorry, another question. Would you recommend for, those of us regular drivers, invest in something like a dash cam, or something that can prove potential innocence if there was an instance where someone's like, I wasn't on my phone, I wasn't distracted? Would you recommend people look into getting something like that to protect themselves?
I don't think that you could go wrong in having something like that. They're very useful, especially when we have a crash situation. Very useful for us to help see, especially because often people involved in crashes don't recall information as clearly or as accurately as what actually happened. And so having those available to you, I think it's similar to when we transitioned. When I started with Highway Patrol, I had a camera in my car, but that was it. Now I have a body camera and a camera in my vehicle. I know there's some concern, oh, now people are going to see what we're doing. Well, if you're doing the right thing, they can do, I think, nothing but help validate that you were doing the right thing. I think you could probably apply the same thing into any type of camera system in your vehicle. If you're doing the right thing, it's going to show that. If there was a slight contributor, it also show that, and it may be not as significant as what somebody reported it to be. So I think from a personal standpoint, I certainly wouldn't discourage ever doing that. Yeah.
That we were on 2100 over there in Utah. We were driving to my sister's house, and then this car was coming like the opposite. But he was like, well, it wasn't she actually. She was like so happy, like driving, and then everybody stopped on the line, and they give her like the space to like do a U-turn, so she can go. with us again. And so she did a U-turn, but the person that before the spade was a police. So it looks like he did, the spade, did a U-turn and then stopped her. I said that so much and like in the news, like a lot of people driving in the contrary of the traffic.
Yeah, so that's because, well, that's been a big topic of conversation in a lot of arenas, right? With our wrong way drivers, some concern about, traffic and configurations. I know that that's been talked about in a lot of areas. Certainly distractions can. We have more complicated roadways than maybe we used to. Not that we can't drive them, but if we introduce a distraction into it, we need to be paying attention. UDOT's got lots of good signage, markings on the road, but we have to pay attention to those, right? It's not just as simple as, suddenly I'm driving thinking I'm in my lane and realize now I'm in the wrong side of the road because I didn't pay attention to those things. So it only takes a few moments to notice those. If you add the other side of it, we talk a lot with our teenage drivers in driver's education about this. They're concerned about crashing. Well, they do a great job because they're terrified about crashing. So they drive very safely for them, at least for a while. But we talk about driving and developing those good habits can actually help keep them safe from other drivers. So the driver who is on the wrong way or goes through the stoplight when it's red because they saw the next one that was green, if we're having good driving behaviors, good habits, we're more conscious of those things. 2100 North and Mountain View the other day, it went green for me. I was on the front row and I waited momentarily. That's just kind of a little habit of watching, it grows green, and just one last head check right before I pulled into the intersection, a pickup truck full speed, probably more than full speed because yellow means speed up, right? Went right through, it would have been right in my door. I don't know if I would have survived that or not, but it was simply from that good behavior. So from the defensive driving standpoint, also eliminating distractions, being observant of things and having good behaviors could protect you from others who are not, because you're probably going to see them out there on the roadway. Other questions? Okay, well, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mark. And if you guys did get a lot of good information out of that presentation, it's actually going to be up on our YouTube page tomorrow, so you can share that with others who may not have been able to attend. In addition to that, we also have the full Start with Safety playlist. So if you like this one, then you can always go check out all the historical ones and see if you enjoyed those as well. Other than that, our next presentation is going to be on, I think Quentin's going to click forward for me. Nope. It's going to be on suicide awareness. And so please join us on May 1st to talk about suicide awareness. May be affecting somebody who you know dearly and you may not be able to recognize the signs. And so we're going to kind of go over those sort of things because everyone is different in how they display mental illness. And that should do it for this time around. So we hope to see you then, and we'll see you next time. And stay safe.
Not really.